Lesson 1 of Effective Bible Teaching. Today, we're going to be talking about the goal of effective Bible teaching. And to do that, we really need to think about what teaching itself is. To explore this a little, watch this video clip with me.
The original machine had a base plate of prefamulated amulite surmounted by a malleable logarithmic casing in such a way that the two spurving bearings were in a direct line with a panometric fan. The lineup consisted simply of 6 hydrocoptic Marsal vanes, so fitted to the ambifacient lunar wane shaft that side fumbling was effectively prevented. The main winding was of the normal Lotus-O deltoid type placed in panendermic semi-boloid slots of the stator. Every 7th conductor being connected by a non-reversible Tremie pipe to the differential girdle spring on the up end of the gram meters.
So, did you get that? What did you learn from watching this video? I know what I learned, that my vocabulary is not nearly as good as I thought it was. And maybe this will show us the error of equating teaching with spouting off information. I can tell you till I'm blue in the face that it may also be employed in conjunction with a drawn reciprocation dingle arm to reduce sinusoidal deplanation. But that doesn't mean I'm teaching you anything. Teaching is not teaching until it is effective. That is, until the learners have learned something. So, how do we know that our teaching has been effective? If, for example, I was trying to teach some 8-year-olds about how to use maps, how would I know that they had learned how to use maps? There are 3 indications that my teaching was effective. First, when the learners are able to understand the message. The students should be able to understand the relationship between the symbols on the map and the actual things they see in real life, like parks and buildings and rivers and streets, and so on. So my teaching is effective if they understand that the map is a representation of these and that we can use it to find our way somewhere. The second is when the learners are able to remember what they have understood. If I come back a week later and I show them a map and they still remember what it is and what it means, then my teaching has been effective on this level as well. And finally, the third level, when the learners can apply what they've understood to their lives. So the ultimate test as to whether my 8-year-olds really understood maps is if I gave them one of these and they were able to navigate their way around Brussels using one. Then I would know that my teaching was effective. Well, likewise, the goal of effective Bible teaching is that learners will be able to understand what the text is saying to them and that this message is sticky enough for them to remember, and ultimately that they are able to apply the message to their daily beliefs and actions. So, what, you may ask, is the single best way to make Bible teaching easier to understand, remember, and apply? What one thing can we do to make our teaching effective? I believe the best way to make teaching effective is to stick to one main message. Now, imagine again that I'm teaching kids how to follow a map. I need to have in my mind my one main message. So here it is. This is how a map can help you find your way around Brussels. Now, it's all too easy to fall into the trap of sharing tons of information about maps. You know, I could talk about the history of maps, and I could talk about latitude and longitude, and I could talk about how maps are made, but without focusing on the one main message of this is how a map will help you find your way around Brussels, my students might end up hearing lots of unrelated and forgettable facts about maps and never learn to use one. You see, too many messages make teaching hard to understand. And too many messages make teaching hard to remember. And if you can't understand and you can't remember what is being taught, then you won't be able to apply it either. So, this is why we say the goal of effective Bible teaching is helping learners understand, remember, and apply the one main message of a biblical text. Now, in preparing to communicate one main message, you will need to take each of these aspects of learning into account. So first, you will study the biblical text to understand the main truth it is communicating, not just the most interesting facts about it. So this means you will not be able to say everything there is to say about the text. You will have to pick and choose. And also, this is not always simple because some biblical texts are quite dense, especially in the epistles and some of these other things, and they can contain many important messages. So your job is to pick out the theme that is most prevalent in the selection of the text, or what we call the pericope you've chosen. So pericope is the word that describes the section of text you're focusing on. So this could be a whole chapter, or a paragraph, or a couple of verses, or a single verse. And as you change the selection of your pericope, the theme that is most prevalent might change as well. You might, for example, zoom in on a small section that has as its main message a point that, if you had selected the whole chapter, would be just a supporting point to that chapter. So perhaps this metaphor might help you understand better what I'm saying. Where I used to live near Geneva, we could look across the lake and see the Alps. And there was one set of mountains in particular that we could see from the Lausanne side called the Dent du Midi. Now, if you looked from a distance and you saw them all together, you would say that the highest one of these Dent du Midi was the Haute Cime on the far right. But if you look through the binoculars at just those middle four, then the Dent Jaune is the highest. Or if you zoomed in on a single mountain, say Cathédrale, then that one becomes highest. And in the same way, each pericope will likely have somewhat different main message depending on the emphasis of the selection you've chosen. You might ask yourself, how would I title this pericope? And that is an idea of its main message. Of course, all the messages in the Bible are important, and each of the messages supports other messages. But to be an effective Bible teacher, it is important to communicate clearly a main message that can be understood, remembered, and applied. In this series, we will teach you the Inductive Bible Study method, which helps you gather many facts from the passage and then discern from them the most important message that should be communicated from. So, the first step was study the text to understand the main truth it communicates. The second step, you will work to use methods to ensure that your learners can best remember the main message that you are communicating. Now, in the old days, people used to commit lots of things to memory. They'd memorize speeches, they'd memorize poems, all kinds of stuff. But now, we're so information bombarded. We often let things go in one ear and out the other because we just have to. There's too much. It takes a lot for anything to stick with us for longer than it took us to understand. So this is where experiential learning comes in. Generally, we remember what we experience far better than some fact we read or heard somewhere, no matter how interesting it was at the time. Look at this table here and see if this is true for you. You remember 10% of what you read. You remember 20% of what you hear. You remember 30% of what you see. You remember 50% of what you hear and see together. You remember 70% of what you say. Well, that is, if you think about it as you say it, not just repeat it like a parrot. And you remember 90% of what you do. So, after you've gone to all the work to dig into your Bible passage and understand it, ask yourself, how much are your learners going to remember if you just talk at them for half an hour? And is this worth the time you have invested in study? Will it be effective? People remember better if the main message can be connected to something larger in their minds. If you can connect the learning to something they already know or a picture from their everyday life, this will help them. And they will also remember better if connections are made between messages each week. Another thing never to forget is that people learn differently. As you prepare to communicate your one main message, take into account the various learning styles that people prefer as they process information. And that way, they will understand and remember better. Here's some different learning styles: words, logic, images, physical activity, music and sound, nature, reflection, and interaction. Reinforcing your main message by using these various styles will help more of your learners engage with it and remember it. So, okay, you have studied the text to understand it, and you have come up with methods to make it memorable. But there is a third incredibly important step. You will seek to apply the main message first to your own life, and then help your learners work through specific applications to their own lives. So this is why Bible teaching is most effective when it is relational, creating opportunities for learners to process personal experiences together. Your experience, as you have sought to apply the main message, will help others to think, how will I apply this? And this is one reason why we will be looking at ways to ask great discussion and reflection questions. Questions that will stimulate your learners and help them begin to think about how to live out what they're learning. If I'm teaching students how to follow a map, they have not really learned this until they actually use one to find their way around. In the same way, just understanding and remembering the main message is useless until it is put into practice. So, what makes for effective teaching about biblical text? It is to focus on the text's one main message, communicated in a way that will be clearly understood, reinforced with methods that make it memorable, and processed in a way that encourages application. And that, my friends, is the goal of effective Bible teaching. If you have not yet joined the Effective Bible Teaching Facebook group, I would invite you to do so. I've posted some online discussion questions there for us to interact with. And you will also find there a document with both a basic exercise to help you apply what you have learned and an advanced exercise if you want to go even further. After all, application, as we learned today, is the ultimate goal in effective teaching. So the basic exercise for this session has two parts. The first part is to read the text that we will be focusing on this course in 3 different translations. You can find all of these translations on BibleGateway.com. So we'd ask that the first translation that you use be the New International Version, what we also call the NIV, and then you may choose 2 other translations, one from each of the 2 lists that we provide. The first list has a few more literal translations, ones that are more what the original text says, and the second list has translations that contain more of the translator's interpretation of the original text. The second part of the basic exercise is to look at that list of learning styles that we saw earlier in this session. You remember words, logic, etc. And then pick 2 that are not like you and think about ways that might help learners with those styles to understand, remember, and apply a main message better. You don't have to apply that to a specific or particular scripture text. Just think generally about what might work for these learners. And then the advanced exercise, which you can choose to do if you wish, is to look at a few different pericopes coming from our focus text, and then to title them to show that selection's particular emphasis. So it would be great if you could post on the Facebook group as soon as you've finished watching this video. And also please try to finish the exercise or exercises by the end of this week. After you've done these exercises, you can also post those files in the Facebook group so I can give you some feedback. May God bless you richly as you seek to become an effective teacher of His Word.